The DA is currently hosting a panel discussion on the party's readiness for the launch of their Local Government Manifesto for election 2021. Now, the party says it will outline the process it has followed to research and compile its election manifesto. This is taking place virtually. We go live there now.
I would say to you that there are many successful projects that the DA has been involved with social housing. I think it's not a fair analysis to say that. I mean, I've certainly looked at some of the incredible work that's been done over the city in a while. Is it enough? Of course it's not. It will never be enough as long as we have rapid urbanization and people coming into the Western Cape and to the city of Cape Town to access good governance. People aren't rushing to Durban and other places. They're coming to the Western Cape because there is opportunity here, and where good governance is in place, opportunity follows. And that has got to, we're going to have to focus on doing more. We're going to have to provide greater densification. And unfortunately, it's an era fraught with litigation. So you want to put up a social housing thing, you've got social housing activists on the one side, you've got developers on the other, you've got NGOs on the other side who all think that there's a better use for that particular piece of land. But the city is absolutely committed. I know that Jordan has made this a centerpiece of his campaign of releasing and getting well-located public land turned into housing opportunities in a work, play and live environment.
I mean, I know that since 2016, for instance, over 40,000 affordable rental units have benefited from a 2 billion rand investment in the city. And so it is a big part of our offer, right, when around affordable housing. And how do we reimagine delivering housing to people, not in the very traditional way that we've seen not entirely working over the past 27 years?
I mean, it's long been a DA position that we really need to harness the individual energies of households and individuals, as well as the private sector, in being able to roll out housing at scale and affordably. The inevitable scenario, the economic situation, has meant that national government has now come to that realization as well, which is why there's going to be less focus on delivering top structures for housing. But we've been saying this for a long time, which is why we are so focused on trying to enhance the ways in which people can self-build and build their own properties. And this is why the rapid release of state-owned land is going to be so important. And a lot of land is in the hands of the national government, and so we have to make sure that that land is released, that it can be used for more affordable housing projects and for service sites, etc. But the important thing also to just bear in mind with the rapid release of state-owned land is that, of course, we want some of it to be used for housing, but we also must think of land as a comprehensive economic asset. So some land will have to go towards housing. Some land might be better used as a school. Some land might be better used for a business that might create jobs. So it's not also necessarily the case that every single piece of state-owned land is going to be released for housing. That wouldn't work either. So I think those kind of nuances and the trade-offs have to be borne in mind. But absolutely the goal is to drive private initiative and self-built housing, which, by the way, is happening anyway. I mean, it doesn't take much all across Africa to see the significant informal settlements that are rising. People prefer, because actually government cannot keep up with the speed of urbanization, so it's not sustainable to expect government to deliver all housing, but also because government can't deliver diversified housing to suit all the different types of typologies and household composition and sizes. And so when people build their own structure, they know the size of their family, they know where exactly they want to live, etc. So I think this kind of new service site approach, where we encourage self-build, but also then give people the tools to be able to build safe and sustainable housing, is definitely going to be the new direction. And that's what we're trying to do in the Western Cape with that better living model, is to show people how to safely construct their own homes.
I think Ferial's question as well, if you come to that. Or
no, I'm going to come to that. I just wanted to tap in here, Karabo. John mentioned quite a bit about, the thing is, one of the things in the Western Cape that we do well is to take corruption out of housing delivery. But that's not the case in many ANC municipalities, particularly in the Free State.
I'm laughing because it sounds even ridiculous that we, 28 years post-democracy, that this is a conversation we're still having, right? It's so painful how you go to towns like your Tromsburg, for example, a small town in the Gerib district of the Free State, where there is literally only a handful of residents, right? And all they need is genuinely housing and connection to sewage and all of those things. You'd have a councillor who ensures that before the distribution of any unit, their mother, their father, their grandmother, their friend, their cousin, their friend of the next aunt, and the whole list can be exhausted, gets the house first before a human being in a family that actually depends on that house. Where and it's painful to even think that a person could be that cruel and that disrespectful to their own fellow human being, to see that you have umakhulu that lives in a house with 7 grandchildren and 2 kids in the same house in a 2-bedroom unit, and they're genuinely depending on government to free them, but no, government couldn't even begin to bother itself as such. And so you are right. So the only way we can get these kind of delivery to residents is by rooting out corruption. Politicians need to understand that it's not about you. It has never been about you. It is about the residents. You are there to give them what they need. And that's what the DA has illustrated to do very well where we govern. So
John, I want us to jump to Farah's question. It's a 2-part question around water provision. She wants to understand what the manifesto promise is on water supply improvement, and then also the other part of the question, bringing the cost of electricity down and infrastructure and roads in municipalities.
Well, I think there's a broader macro issue around that question, and that is the separation of powers and the failing national government sphere. Remember, national government's responsible for bulk water provision, national government's responsible for safety and security, national government's responsible for electricity, supply and the like. But increasingly we've seen, as the national government has stuttered and failed, local government has had to step in. And what I'm very proud about the manifesto and visiting DA success stories is how DA governments are not just sitting back saying, Yamadat ons leef, that's a national problem. They're actually getting their hands stuck in and getting things done there. So whether it's ensuring that we one stage below load shedding in the city of Cape Town, whether it's ensuring that we are the provincial government is working with the city to deal with water scarcity and a water resilience plan to make sure we never ever faced with a day zero situation again. Whether it's Ellen Windy and the city having to step in and deal with safety and security in communities and the fight against poaching, the fight against drugs, where national government has simply retreated. Cities are not going to be able to, in future, just hope that national government's going to improve. I think cities have got a duty now to rescue their residents from the clutches, which is why we've been pushing so hard for greater powers to be devolved down to local government level, to free municipalities from the yoke of failing national government entities and policies. So I'm really excited about Geesie van Deventer. You're going to read about it in the manifesto, what she's doing to, within a decade, to make Stellenbosch Eskom free. Eskom free. Be able to have their own electricity generation and supply. What the province of the Western Cape has got planned for rail safety and for safety and security, to keep people safe in their homes. What the city of Cape Town and others are doing to procure power from independent power producers so that we can get away from this yoke of national government. Because if we're going to wait for Pretoria to provide, you're going to be waiting a very long time. And I think local government is an opportunity, and particularly where we are able to get into power at local government level, we can start to protect and make those people feel safe from the failing national government.
Absolutely.
If I can add just on that, Sivi, I think a critical part, especially with water services, is actually making sure that we keep up with maintenance and that we address the maintenance backlog. And it's not a very kind of sexy thing to talk about, and I think also that's why traditionally governments have underinvested in terms of maintaining infrastructure, because it happens below ground, people don't see it, and it's a lot less attractive than, I don't know, building a stadium or something people can see, where they can be like, oh, look what this government has done. It's below ground, you don't really see it. You see it many years later when you then run into the problems of having had years of neglect. I mean, I live in Johannesburg, and it may not be a thing around the country, but certainly where I live, water shedding is a thing, where you're often, without water for hours in a day, because they're probably doing maintenance that has been left off for a very long time, and now it has this kind of effect when you're trying to address a large historical backlog. So that's one part of it. But I think also an interesting thing that some people might see in the manifesto, which hasn't really appeared before, is almost every offer ends off with the statement about both the rights but also responsibilities of citizens. Now, this might seem, well, it's a novel thing to do in a manifesto because it's usually about saying what the government will do. But we think it's so important now to start introducing the idea of citizen responsibility into the manifesto, that yes, governments do have a duty to deliver, but citizens also have responsibilities as well. If you look at places where there's a lot of litter or etc., citizens also do have a responsibility not to litter, not to destroy or vandalize, public infrastructure. That even when there is a protest, that there's a way to do that without then, destroying infrastructure and vandalizing. But I mean, the destruction isn't only during protests. I mean, sometimes people just do it for, I don't know, whatever reason, but it's not necessarily protest linked. And so even with water, there is a need to reduce our usage as well. And that goes with electricity as well. These are not easy conversations, and admittedly, sometimes the ways in which governments go about it has been a bit heavy-handed, or maybe without much communication, and I don't know necessarily whether water meters are the only way to go, other solutions, but definitely there needs to be a conversation about water usage. We don't use water responsibly in South Africa. There's a lot of drinkable water that is used to, wash your car or water your garden, which shouldn't be the case.
Flushing drinking water down the toilet.
Exactly. So I think that there's that kind of co-responsibility, both from governments as well as citizens, and that conversation needs to happen. So there's a lot of more buy-in.
I just want to make a point as well about nothing, and Gwen's absolutely right. Infrastructure is also functional maintenance, but Karabo, you would also, I'm sure, have experienced this because it's a phenomenon that I picked up during my entire trip in the Northwest, that in some of those small towns, outside of the glare of the public, there's a deliberate breaking of the infrastructure because the opportunities for rent seeking. One of the towns I visited, there was a councillor in the town who was paid 800,000 rand a month for their water tanker to go and deliver water in a community. Contracts and rent seeking on sewerage honeysuckers, so that when you wreck the infrastructure, you're creating the opportunity for rent seeking and rent extraction and corruption to take place. And I'm sure it's the same.
No, it genuinely is the same. It's not just the case with that. It's as though government plans strategically to not have the technical capacity in-house to do anything also. So apart from the deliberate vandalism, there's a conceited effort to make sure that there is no technical capacity in-house to do anything, so that we can take out tenders, so that other people can do so. We know that when we take out those tenders, we're going to influence who gets the tender and how much the money is going to be. And the consultants, your surveillances and all of those things, and then we get the money. And what's also painful to see is that all of this is happening at the expense of the delivery of services to residents. So, for example, again, Tromswak, it's my classic example. Tromswak was such a beautifully maintained town. It was literally your George of the Free State. Such a beautiful town. Right now, there are houses built everywhere. The sewage network hasn't been maintained for years. The network also cannot carry all of the residents that are living there right now. So government has made sure that we're never going to make sure that there's anybody in-house that's able to do all of those things, because when we do, then there is no need for a tender, there's no need for a friend who can get a brown envelope for whatever. So corruption remains the bed of all the mess that we see in South Africa. And again, I beg to argue that it's not even corruption that's the problem. The problem is the individuals that are greedy, that have lost respect, that continue to spit at the feet of democracy, and have forgotten that the reason why these positions exist is so that people can live a better life, not so that we could become pop stars.
Absolutely. Guys, I want to get to two more questions. Atim Tongana from Newsroom Africa. John, you spoke about the party's record in governance and that there are improvements to be made. Where in specific areas are you looking for those improvements, and where should sort of communities in DA-governed cities expect those improvements? And then a question to Gwen. Gwen says the manifesto is simplified and included expert views in its drafting. Who are some of these experts and what did they observe, or some of the, I suppose, the inputs that they made into the drafting process? John?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think that DA governments are going to be faced with many of these crises, and I think the big crisis is going to be around infrastructure. DA governments are going to have to find money to be able to improve infrastructure. Because there is a large inflow of people coming to DA governed areas across the Western Cape, but also in Midvaal, and also in Modimolle Mokgopong. People gravitate to where good governance and service happens because they vote with their feet before they vote in the ballot bit. So that's put pressure on DA infrastructure, and I think the parties where we govern is going to have to make sure that we're investing a lot more money into bulking up infrastructure, ensuring that we can meet the capacity of being. It's very difficult for towns and cities to keep up. We don't have reliable census figures anymore. Our census is completely outdated. I think government figures are wholly insufficient when it comes to the rate of urbanization that's taking place. As small towns collapse, as Trompsburg collapse, people then have to move to Amangaung, and that puts pressure on that infrastructure. So it's a terrible cycle. So infrastructure at a local level, as Gwen said, is sort of the skeleton of local government. That you can't have economic development unless you've got reliable water and electricity supply. That if you're going to grow the economy, you need to make sure that you've got enough supply. I was in Silverton at the Ford plant this last week. They roll a vehicle off there every 90 seconds. They make the Wild Track for export and the Raptor for export. They've built a supplier park next to their plant to stimulate development. They can't get electricity in there because Eskom cannot supply them with electricity there. Now, there's a huge opportunity for massive economic growth and expansion and employment, jobs for people there. But they can't do it because there's not enough electricity to feed in. And so that part of the plant's got to work with generators. Drives up the cost, makes us less competitive. And that has a knock-on effect, in terms of the number of jobs that we can create there.
Ferrell actually made a mention, before I come to Gwen, about the input process. Ferrell made a point earlier about the legacy of undoing what has been broken in municipalities where we don't govern. It just talks about 2016, you were in the city of Johannesburg. Was it not enough time to really change things around? And on what then are we looking to see?
We need a 5-year uninterrupted term of a stable government. And that's why we're making the pitch to people. Give us a majority in Joburg and Tshwane, so we've got a 5-year clear run of steering those municipalities in the right direction. In 2016, we weren't given a free hand. We had to rely on some parties that don't share our values and principles, unreliable coalition partners, and it veered the vehicle across the road. We need to have a 5-year uninterrupted term of DA governance. That was the big turnaround for the city of Cape Town. When we got our own majority in the city of Cape Town, that's when the city took off. That's when the jobs were created. That's when the city became really the best run metro in the country across all the metrics. So we've got to be able to have that uninterrupted 5-year term that brings stability. Even in Tshwane, it's very difficult. You're living from council meeting to council meeting. It's no way to govern a city. It's just, you don't have certainty, and it makes it very difficult to implement your program. So the pitch that we're making at local government level, because it does come down to the one fundamental question. It's not who you like in the DA. It's not how somebody speaks in the DA. It's not about it. This question in this local government election is about a simple thing. Who do I trust to deliver services, to run my municipality, and to make sure the money's being spent on me? I think when you drill it down to that one fundamental question that you've got to ask yourself, there is a very obvious answer, and that is a party that doesn't talk, it does, that doesn't tell, it shows, and is absolutely making a difference in people's lives. Well, even our opponents have to concede. Even our opponents have to concede that the DA gets things done.
Gwen? Manifesto process, experts and the like?
I mean, we consult a wide range of experts and, and academic papers, etc. But I also don't want to make it seem like I'm running away from the issue. So I can certainly name a few, but before I do want to say, these are independent consultants and experts who would advise any political party or any organization looking for input. They're not DA aligned or anything of the sort, but I mean, it ranges. So, from Gail Jennings on transport, Robert McGaffin on housing, Chris Yelland on electrical infrastructure, on electricity, Paul Moyer on ICT. So, I mean, I could go on, and I almost feel bad naming some names because certainly there's been so many, so I don't want to elevate others above, others. But so it's a whole wide range of people on different subjects.
And of course, I think what's important is that, these are people who are experts in their field and not necessarily people who are aligned in the DA, but we
most
still
of them
seek
academics
out.
at public universities or institutions.
Yeah. All right.
But I just want to make a point on that because, it also speaks to Ferial's question. Local government is so broken in so many of these towns that even if the DA was to get into power in those towns, it's not going to be turned around overnight. And that's why we're talking about our whole of society approach, about bringing in organized business, organized labor, organized agriculture, and creating a new ecosystem of local government where you've got people with private sector expertise that are going to pitch in. You're going to have public-private partnerships. So what we've done in Modi Mokopong, we've signed a MOU with a very well-known NGO and CBO, and they're going to be providing engineering services and the like expertise so that the municipality can scope its projects properly. That capacity doesn't exist in many small towns in South Africa. You're going to have to bring that expertise in. How do you scope a major sewage treatment works? It is a very technical process. How do you scope a project to roll out mass electrification without that expertise? And many of those towns have been denuded through corruption, through affirmative action, through many other things, have stripped those towns of those engineers and experts. That there's no longer the capacity, even if they get the money, and you see this with the municipal infrastructure grant, even if they get the money ends up going back to national government because there's no expertise within the municipality to ensure a proper spend and scoping and tender process for that thing. So you're going to have to change the ecosystem of local government. And there's no one party that's going to turn it around, but you've got to get a party in there that's able to demonstrate that where we get into government, we are able to change that ecosystem and bring it.
And that's what we've been able to do if you look at Midvaal, which is like, a DA government in the middle of Gauteng. And we've been in government there for a while, and we've been able to change.
And that's a great example because, people say, oh, well, the Western Cape, it was all this infrastructure that was already there. Midvaal is a great example. You've got the best municipality in Gauteng living in the same 100 square kilometers as the worst run municipality in Gauteng. Same geographic constraints, same transport constraints, same everything. Why is Midvaal the best run municipality in Gauteng? Well, it's the DA difference. We get things done. Why is the neighboring municipality such a complete basket case and the worst run municipality? It comes down to competence, efficiency, and effectiveness at government. And when it comes to that, only the DA gets things done.
I have to run through some.
All right, let's come out of that discussion now. That is the DA hosting its panel discussion ahead of its party's manifesto launch this coming Saturday.